The snow on Vorath did not fall, it attacked. It came sideways, hard and sharp, like someone throwing fistfuls of broken glass across the open tundra. The wind had no mercy and no direction. It changed its mind every few seconds, slamming into anything that dared to stand upright. Rail Dunmore was upright. He hated it. He pulled his coat tighter and kept walking. His scanner beeped in his gloved hand, mostly showing nothing, empty white in every direction, wind readings too high, temperature at -31 and still dropping. He was supposed to be checking the east perimeter fence. 3 sensors had gone dark in the last hour, probably buried under new drifts. Nothing unusual for Vorath. Everything here was trying to die, and the colony's job was to stop it from taking them along. Rail was 32 years old, broad-shouldered, and not the type to talk much. He had been the station medic and mechanic for 4 years. He fixed people the same way he fixed machines, quietly, practically, without a lot of conversation about it. Most of the 400 people at Station Greywood liked him for exactly this reason. He was 50 meters past the last safe marker when his scanner did something strange. It beeped twice, then it showed a signature. Biological, small, faint, about 400 meters off his current path, deeper into the open tundra where no one had any business being. He stopped walking. He stared at the number. His comm crackled. Dunmore. It was Sergeant Ida Holt, Colony Security, her voice flat and no nonsense as always. Your transponder is showing you past the east marker. Get back on path. I'm seeing a biosig, he said. A pause. Weather origin. Ice fauna pings up sometimes in a bad storm. You know this. It's not moving. Another pause. Come back in, Rail. Visibility is under 8 meters out there. He looked at the scanner again. The signature was still there. Small, faint, completely still. I'll be quick, he said, and turned off the comm before she could answer. It took him 17 minutes to cover 400 meters. The wind fought him the whole way, and twice he went down to one knee in a drift. He used his arm to shield his face and moved by the scanner reading alone because he could not see more than a few steps ahead. He almost walked past it. His boot caught something soft under the snow, and he looked down. There was a shape there, curled tight, barely visible under a thin layer of white that had settled over it like a blanket. He crouched and brushed the snow away with his gloved hands, and what he found made him go very still for a moment. It was a creature, small, maybe the size of a large dog, though shaped entirely wrong for a dog. It had scales, dark grey-blue, and 2 wings folded tight against its back, the membranes frozen stiff. A long, narrow head, a short snout, 4 limbs tucked under its body. Its eyes were half open and glassy. Its whole body was shaking, a deep, fine tremor that came from somewhere bone deep, the kind of shaking that meant the cold had been working on it for a very long time. Rail did not know what it was. He had never seen anything like it in 4 years on Vorath or anywhere else. But he knew what hypothermia looked like. He knew what dying looked like. He unzipped his coat. He did not think about it. He just did it. He slid his arms under the creature. It was heavier than it looked, and pressed it against his chest, then zipped the coat back up around both of them as far as it would go. The creature flinched once, a weak twitch, then went still against him. He could feel the cold radiating off its scales like a stone pulled from a frozen river. All right, he said, to no one in particular. Let's go. He turned back into the wind and started walking. It took him longer going back. The creature was awkward to carry inside the coat, all odd angles and stiff wings. His own body heat was already working. He could feel the warmth building in the space between them, and after a few minutes, the trembling in the creature's body seemed to soften slightly. Not gone, but slightly less. Ida met him at the east gate with 2 other colonists, and a look on her face that said she had prepared a very thorough lecture. She stopped when she saw the shape inside his coat. What, she said, is that? I don't know yet, Rail said. Get Fenner and turn the heat up in the med bay. He walked past her and into the station, and the door sealed behind him, cutting off the wind. The colony's AI spent 40 minutes searching before it found a match. When the result came up on the med bay screen, Ida read it twice and sat down slowly in a chair. Drakel juvenile, approximately 8 to 12 months post-hatching. The Drakel were ancient. They were enormous when fully grown. They were among the oldest sapient species in the galactic compact, and they did not think highly of younger races. Humans had been in the compact for 80 years. The Drakel had been in it for 4,000. And their child was lying on a med bay table in a human colony station, wrapped in a thermal sheet, breathing in shallow little pools. Ida looked at Rael. "You understand what this means?" "It means we need more thermal sheets," Rael said, and went to the supply cabinet. Nobody slept that first night, not really. Fenna Osei, the colony's only doctor, pulled every piece of medical data she could find on cold-blooded non-mammalian physiology, cross-referenced it with what little the compact archives had on Drakel biology, and came up with something that was mostly guesswork held together by logic and a lot of very careful hopping. She set up 3 heat lamps at measured distances from the table. Not too close. She did not know how Drakel scales responded to concentrated radiant heat, and she was not willing to find out the hard way. She mixed a high-protein liquid from colony food stores, thinned it down until it was almost like broth, and rigged a slow drip through a medical tube because the hatchling's jaw muscles were still too stiff to work properly. She replaced the frozen polymer membrane on the left wing with surgical mesh and sealed it with medical-grade bonding gel, working slowly, checking every few minutes to make sure she was not causing more damage than she was fixing. Rael sat in a chair beside the table and did not leave. Ida came in at some point around midnight and stood in the doorway. "You should sleep." Later, Rael said, "The compact notification is mandatory. I already sent it." He nodded. He had expected that. "A Drakel response could come fast," she said, "if they think we did something to the child." "We didn't." "I know that, you know that. They don't know that yet." Rael looked at the hatchling. Its breathing had evened out over the last few hours, still shallow, but steadier. The deep trembling had faded to almost nothing. Its scales, which had been a dull grey-blue when he found it, were warming slightly toward something darker and richer, the way color comes back into cold hands. "Then we'll show them," he said. Ida left. Rael stayed. By the second morning, the hatchling could keep its eyes open. They were copper-colored, very large for the size of its face, and they tracked movement with the slow, careful focus of something that was not yet sure whether to be afraid. It was definitely afraid. Every time someone new walked through the med bay door, it pulled itself tighter on the table, wings pressing flat, head lowering. Fenna learned quickly to move slowly and to announce herself before entering. The other colonists who came to look, and several of them did, word having spread the way word always spreads in a small station, were firmly turned away. Rael did not move fast. He did not make sudden sounds. He sat beside the table and offered food on the end of a flat tool because his hands alone seemed to make the hatchling nervous, and after 2 days of this, the creature finally ate directly from his palm. That was the first thing. The second thing was Nira. Rael's younger sister was the station's communications engineer, sharp-minded and restless in the way of someone who needed a new problem every few days, or she would start rearranging things that did not need rearranging. She had been digging through the compact's galactic archives since the night Rael brought the hatchling in, specifically through every recorded sample of Drakel vocalization she could find. There were not many. The Drakel did not share their language freely, but there were enough formal compact addresses, translated diplomatic exchanges, a few biological observation logs from a century ago, for Nira to begin building a rough map of sounds and meanings. On the third day, she walked into the med bay, stood 2 meters from the table, and said one word in Drakel. It was a greeting, a simple one. Something close to, "I see you and mean no harm." The hatchling's head came up fast, its copper eyes fixed on Nira with an expression that was hard to read on a face built so differently from a human one, but which felt unmistakably like shock. Then it made a sound, low, careful, like a question. Neera looked at her notes, looked at the hatchling, tried her best approximation of the response. The hatchling made the sound again, more clearly. Then it made another sound, softer, and repeated it several times, as if offering it. Neera grabbed Rael's arm. I think that's its name. They worked it out over the next 2 days, cross-checking every sound against the archive, arguing over pronunciations, getting corrected by the hatchling itself whenever they got something wrong. It would tilt its head a particular way and make a short, sharp sound that Neera decided meant no, try again. After much trial and correction, they settled on something they could say without damaging it too badly. Zoru. They told him their names in return. He tried Neera first, which came out close enough. He tried Rael, and it came out sounding like it had an extra syllable in the middle that did not exist in any human language, but he was so clearly pleased with himself for managing it that Rael smiled and said, "Good enough." On the 6th day, a response came back from the Galactic Compact, not from the Drakel directly. From the Compact administration, terse and formal, a Drakel delegation had been notified and was being dispatched to Vorath. Estimated arrival, 22 days. Ida gathered the senior staff, and the word spreading through the colony after that was quieter than usual. People kept working, because there was always work on Vorath, but they did it with a particular focused silence that meant they were thinking about things they did not quite want to say out loud. Zoru, who understood none of this, and had just that morning figured out how to pull himself upright on all 4 legs for the first time since arriving, spent 20 minutes walking in small, careful circles around the med bay, while Rael spotted him from behind, ready to catch. He did not fall. When he reached the wall and turned around successfully, he looked at Rael with those copper eyes. Rael nodded once. "There you go," he said. Zoru made a sound that Neera, reviewing her notes later, tentatively translated as, "I did a thing." She was probably right. 3 weeks was not a long time, but it was long enough. Zoru learned to walk without wobbling. He learned to eat solid food, specifically heavily charred protein blocks, which he discovered he could char himself by breathing on them, a talent that delighted him enormously and alarmed Fenna the first time he did it indoors. He learned about 40 words of galactic common, mostly nouns, a few verbs. He learned that Rael always smelled faintly of engine oil, and that this meant Rael was doing something useful. And so engine oil became, for Zoru, the smell of a person worth being near. He followed Rael through the station the way a shadow follows a person, quietly, close, watching everything. He watched Rael treat a colonist's frostbitten fingers, wrapping them with slow care, explaining what he was doing in a low, steady voice, even though the colonist was clearly not listening, just in pain. He watched Rael climb inside a heating unit and spend 2 hours fixing a condenser coil that had been causing power drops in the East Wing. He watched Rael sit with an elderly woman named Bet, who had been having a bad week, and just talk to her, not about anything important, just talk, until she looked less like she was carrying something too heavy. Zoru watched all of this and said nothing, because he was still building the words for what he was seeing. On the 19th day, Ambassador Drev Holst arrived from the Compact's Human Bureau on a fast courier ship. He was a thin man in a very clean uniform who shook hands too many times and spoke in the careful, padded way of someone who had spent his career making sure no one got offended. He asked to see Zoru immediately. Zoru looked at Holst from across the room with his copper eyes and did not move toward him. Holst asked if the hatchling was stable. Fenna said yes. Holst asked whether there had been any incidents. Ida said no. Holst said several things about diplomatic sensitivity and galactic optics and the importance of managed communication, and while he was saying them, Zoru walked across the room and sat beside Rael's feet. Holst noticed this. He did not seem to know what to do with it. The delegation's signal came on the 22nd day, right on time. Not a fleet yet, just a transmission, routed through the orbital relay station that sat above Vorath like a cold grey eye. It came through on the main screen in the colony's communications room, and it was audio only, a voice, deep and smooth as stone under water, speaking galactic common with perfect precision and no warmth at all. The voice identified itself as the matriarch of the Drakel Eastern line. She said she had questions regarding the condition and custody of a juvenile Drakel reported found on a human colony world. She said the word custody the way you might say it if you were deciding whether to use it as a legal term or a threat. She asked whether the colony had documentation of all actions taken regarding the juvenile from the moment of discovery. She did not say thank you. She did not say we are grateful. She did not say anything that could be interpreted as warmth. Holst was standing very straight and beginning to sweat in a room that was not warm. Rael was not supposed to be in the communications room. He had come to fix a relay panel on the far wall and had simply not left when the transmission started because it did not seem like the right moment to walk out. He stepped forward. Holst noticed and made a small sharp gesture that meant stop, do not speak. Rael spoke anyway. We found the child alone in a blizzard, he said, loudly enough for the microphone to carry. He was in hypothermic shock. We treated him. He is healthy now. That is all that happened. Silence from the transmission. Holst closed his eyes briefly. Who is speaking? The matriarch's voice said. Rael Dunmore, colony medic. I found him. Another silence, longer this time. You will present full medical documentation when the delegation arrives, the matriarch said. Then the transmission ended. Holst turned to Rael with the look of a man deciding which of several available arguments to use first. She asked for documentation, Rael said. We have documentation. Fenner logged everything. You cannot simply, Holst started. I didn't say anything wrong. That is not the point. The point is protocol. The point is that the Drakel are. I know what the Drakel are, Rael said. I also know we didn't do anything wrong, so I'm not going to act like we did. He went back to the relay panel and finished fixing it. Soru had been sitting in the doorway of the communications room the whole time, listening. His galactic common was still incomplete. He had understood maybe half the words, but language he was learning was only part of how humans communicated. The rest was in how they stood and whether their hands were steady and whether their voice changed when someone pushed against them. Rael's voice had not changed. Soru stored this. He was storing many things about Rael. He did not yet have the words for what he was building from all these stored things, but it was taking a shape inside him, the way ice takes the shape of whatever holds it. That evening, Nira found him sitting by the east window, watching the storm outside. She sat beside him and did not say anything for a while. Then Soru said, slowly and carefully in galactic common, Rael was not afraid. No, Nira said. Soru was quiet for a moment, then, why? Nira thought about it, because he knew what he did, and it was right. Soru turned this over. Outside, the snow came sideways off the tundra, hard and cold and endless. I want to know that, he said finally, what I did, if it was right. Nira looked at him. You stayed alive, she said. That counts. The ships did not look like ships. They looked like something the planet itself had decided to grow upward, 3 dark masses descending through the clouds above Vorath, each one large enough that its shadow alone covered a significant portion of the colony's visible sky. They made no sound. That was the worst part. Something that large should have made a sound. Instead, they settled into orbit with a silence that pressed down like a hand on the chest. The whole colony came to the windows. One of the 3 ships sent down a lander, smaller, still enormous by human standards, roughly the size of the colony's main building. It touched down on the flat ground outside the east gate with a precision that suggested landing was something it found barely worth paying attention to. 13 figures came out. Elder Torath came first. He was old in the way that mountains are old, not fragile, not slow, but dense with time, like every year had added another layer of something harder than bone. His scales were a deep charcoal gray that had gone almost black at the edges. He moved deliberately, and he looked at everything with the calm of someone who had seen a great deal and been surprised very little. Kale came second. He was young by Drakel standards, larger than Soru, still growing into the width of his wings, with the sharp, restless energy of someone who had expected to be doing something more important today. He had amber eyes and a set to his jaw that said he had opinions about most things and no particular desire to keep them to himself. 11 guards followed in a line. Holst went to meet them with his cleanest smile and his most careful words. He said the colony was honored. He said they were grateful for the visit. He said they hoped to answer any questions. Torath did not answer him. He walked past and looked at the station. Then he saw Soru. Soru had come outside with Rael and Nira. He had not been told to stay inside. He had not been told to come outside. He had simply gone where Rael went. The moment Torath's eyes landed on Soru, something in the elder's face shifted, not emotion exactly, but a kind of reckoning, like a person who has been carrying a long worry and now has to decide what to do with it. Kale saw Soru and moved toward him immediately, direct and fast. He spoke in Drakel, low and tight. Soru answered in Drakel. Then he straightened, deliberately, visibly, and repeated himself. Kale's amber eyes moved to Rael. The look was not friendly. It was the look of someone taking measure of a thing they had already decided was beneath them and finding the process irritating. He said something in Drakel. Nira, standing close, caught most of it. She did not translate it out loud, but her expression tightened. Soru said something back, short, flat, certain. This time Kale went silent. His jaw moved slightly, like he was considering responses and dismissing them. Torath, who had watched all of this without expression, turned to Rael. "The hatchling defends you," Torath said, in perfect galactic common. "He doesn't need to," Rael said. "And yet he does." Torath studied Rael for a moment. "I want to see the medical records, all of them." Fenna, who had been standing nearby trying to look professionally calm, nodded and led the elder inside. Torath spent 6 hours in the med bay. He did not ask for help. He did not explain what he was looking for. He read everything: Fenna's treatment logs, Rael's incident report, Nira's language documentation, the AI database search records from the first night. He read them in the order they were created, slowly, going back occasionally to check something he had passed. No one bothered him. Rael fixed 2 things in the east corridor that had been on his list. Fenna reorganized a supply cabinet. Nira updated the Drakel vocabulary archive with things Soru had taught her. Kale did not know what to do with the colony, so he walked through it with his guard and was politely refused entry to anything sensitive by Ida, who was entirely unbothered by him. He seemed to find this confusing. At some point in the early evening, Kale found himself in the common room, which was where people ate and sat and occasionally argued about small things. Several colonists were in there. One of them, a mechanic named Dove, offered Kale a drink without ceremony, the way you offer anyone standing in your kitchen. Kale did not know how to deal with this. He took the drink. He did not say thank you, but he sat down, which was its own kind of answer. At the end of the 6th hour, Torath came out of the med bay. His face gave nothing away, but he found Rael and stood before him in a way that was less confrontational than it was deliberate, the way you stand before something you are trying to understand correctly. "Every intervention is documented," Torath said. "Yes," Rael said. "You kept records for 6 consecutive days before you had any reason to think anyone would ask for them." "That's how I do things." Torath looked at him for a moment that stretched a little longer than comfortable. Then he said, "I need to speak with you privately tomorrow morning." He walked away before Rael could answer. Soru had been watching from the far end of the corridor. He came to stand beside Rael after Torath left, and Rael looked down at him. "What did Kale say to you?" Rael asked. "Outside, when he first came over." Soru was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in his careful galactic common, he said, "I was ashamed to our line, that I should have died rather than be saved by lesser beings." Rael said nothing. "I told him," Soru continued, that lesser beings was not a thing I knew anymore, that I had been watching beings for 3 weeks and I had not seen lesser, I had seen capable, I had seen careful. He paused. He did not like this. No, Rael said, I expect he didn't. Soru looked up at him with those copper eyes. Was I wrong to say it? Rael thought about it honestly. No, he said, you weren't wrong. Soru nodded. He stayed beside Rael for a while after that, just standing there in the corridor while the station hummed around them, warm and lit, and full of the ordinary sounds of people getting on with things. Outside, 3 ships sat in the dark above Vorath and said nothing. Rael had expected to meet Torath in one of the station's small conference rooms. Instead, a Drakel guard came for him in the morning and led him outside across the frozen ground to the lander, and up a ramp into the interior of the ship, and through corridors that were high-ceilinged and dark and smelled like stone and old heat, and into a room that had no chairs sized for a human and no lighting positioned for human eyes. Rael stood, he waited. Torath came in without the guard, which was either an honor or an efficiency. It was hard to say with the elder. Sit if you like, Torath said. I know the floor is not ideal. I'm fine standing, Rael said. Torath moved to the far side of the room and stood with his back to the wall, a Drakel habit Nira had mentioned that meant they were speaking as equals, not because they considered you equal necessarily, because they were choosing to. I am going to tell you something, Torath said, that is not yet public knowledge in the compact. I tell you because what you did has made you part of this, whether you understand it or not. Rael said nothing, he listened. Soru was not lost, Torath said, he was left. The words landed quietly. Rael let them sit for a moment. Left, he repeated. There is a faction within my people. Old families, old thinking. They believe that strength is the only thing worth preserving in a species. Hatchlings who are small, who are slow to develop, who show early signs of what they call diminishment, they believe these hatchlings should not survive. It is not law. It is forbidden, in fact, very specifically forbidden by the matriarch's own code. But it happens, has happened, for longer than I would like to admit. Rael kept his face still. He was very good at keeping his face still. Soru's flame did not appear on time, Torath continued. He was smaller than expected at 8 months. The faction that watches for such things made a decision. They took him out during a patrol rotation, far from the home fleet, and they left him on the coldest world they could find on the current route. Vorath. They expected no one would look, Torath said. Not in that storm, not that far from any settlement. They expected the snow. Rael thought about the scanner reading, the faint little signature, still and quiet in the white. He thought about turning off the comm and walking into the blizzard. Your documentation, Torath said, is now the most complete external record of a living Drakel hatchling's recovery that has ever been submitted to the compact archives. Every hour, every decision, every note Fenner made on improvised treatment, every word your sister logged in the language records. It is evidence, Rael Dunmore, not of your wrongdoing, which was never in question for me, but of the chain of events that preceded the discovery. Cross-referenced with patrol logs I have been quietly collecting for 11 years. It places Soru's abandonment at a specific time, a specific location, by specific individuals. He paused. I have been building this case for over a decade, Torath said, and a human medics incident log finished it. Rael was quiet for a moment. Is Soru safe now? He said. Torath looked at him. That is the first thing you ask. It's the only thing that matters to me. It depends on what happens next, Torath said. The faction is old, they have influence, but the matriarch has not known the full extent of what I have gathered until now. She will know it today. He paused again. She has asked to speak with you herself. They went up through the ship, higher than Rael had been, into a chamber at the vessel's center that was very large and very still. The walls were engraved with something Rael could not read. The light came from somewhere he could not identify, low and amber-colored. The matriarch was larger than Torath. She was larger than anything Rael had been in a room with before. Her scales were the deep red-black of cooling metal, and her eyes were gold, not amber, gold, with the kind of steadiness in them that comes from seeing too much over too long. She looked at Rael for a long time. Rael looked back. "You carried my grandson through a blizzard," she said at last, "inside your coat. Why?" Rael considered the question honestly. He always tried to answer honestly. "He was cold," he said. The matriarch closed her eyes. She was silent for so long that Rael began to wonder if he had broken some protocol by speaking plainly. Then she opened her eyes again, and they were exactly the same as before, gold, steady, old beyond any easy reckoning, but something behind them had shifted, not softened, something more specific than that, something that looked like a door being opened in a wall that had been sealed for a very long time. "The faction will be tried," she said, "under our law, with the evidence Torath has compiled." "Good," Rael said. "Your colony will be called to submit formal testimony to the compact inquiry." "We'll do it." She stuttered him, "You are not afraid of me." He thought about this carefully because she deserved a careful answer. "I don't have a reason to be," he said. "I didn't do anything to Soru except what anyone should have done. I've got nothing to defend." The matriarch was quiet again. Then she said very precisely, "My people have a saying. It translates roughly to this: the worth of a being is not in their scale or their fire. It is in what they do when no one is watching and nothing is required." She looked at Rael. "No one was watching," she said. "Nothing was required of you." Rael did not answer. There was not really an answer to give. He went back down through the ship and out across the cold ground to the station, where Soru was waiting by the east gate with his copper eyes and his half-grown wings, and the very specific look of someone who has been pretending not to be worried and is relieved that the pretending can stop. Rael put a hand on the top of Soru's head, the first time he had done this, and he did it without thinking. Soru went very still, then he leaned into it just slightly. "Was she angry?" Soru asked. "No," Rael said, "I don't think so." "What did she say?" Rael thought about the gold eyes and the door opening in the wall. "She said something that mattered," he said. "I'll tell you later when I've figured out how to say it right." They went back inside together, out of the cold. The compact assembly hall on Station Meridian 7 held roughly 2,000 seats, all of them filled. 40 worlds were watching on relay. The Drakel inquiry had been the subject of galactic attention for 6 months, not because it was the first internal Drakel trial in living memory, though it was, but because of what had started it. A small colony on a backwater ice world, a medic with a scanner and a coat, a child who should have been dead. The faction that had abandoned Soru stood in the formal dock, 11 individuals, names entered into the record, charges read in 3 languages. Torath presented the evidence over 2 days, piece by piece, the way a person lays down something very heavy they have been carrying for a very long time. The compact archive logs, the patrol rotation records, the timeline. And at the end, Fenner's medical notes, Nira's language documentation, Rael's incident report, 6 days of careful human record keeping that placed Soru on that tundra at precisely the time and location the faction's own movement logs showed they had been. The match was exact. The case was complete. The matriarch gave the ruling herself. The faction was disbanded. Its senior members were stripped of rank and removed from all positions within the Drakel fleet structure. The ruling was filed into the Compact's permanent record, not as a footnote, but as a formal precedent. Soru testified on the 3rd day. He was bigger now. In 8 months he had grown considerably, still young, still technically a juvenile, but no longer the small shaking thing Rael had found under the snow. His scales had deepened to a rich dark blue, almost purple in certain lights. His wings worked. His flame worked, which he had discovered 3 months after arriving at Greywood, producing a fire the size of a fist that he had promptly and accidentally used to ignite Dov's work gloves, which Dov had told him was fine, they were old gloves. He spoke first in Galactic Common for the compact record. Then he switched to Drakel because there were things he needed to say that did not exist in any other language. He was calm and clear. He did not perform distress, and he did not perform forgiveness. He said what had happened. He said what he remembered. He said what he had learned since. He said, I did not know until humans showed me that being small was not the same as being without worth. The chamber was very quiet. The vote on humanity's status in the compact came 4 weeks after the trial closed. It was not a unanimous vote. It was not even close to unanimous, but it passed. Humanity was elevated from provisional membership to full standing, not because humans had powerful ships or advanced weapons or a long galactic history, but because 3 elder species stood up in the assembly and said, with varying levels of eloquence and personal feeling, that a species which acts without calculation when a child is dying is a species that can be trusted. That trust, they said, was rarer and more valuable than almost anything else the compact measured. Holst sent Rael a very long congratulatory message. Rael read the first paragraph and then went to fix a water recycler that had been making an odd noise. Kale, who had spent 4 months on Vorath during the inquiry process and had therefore spent 4 months being repeatedly offered food and drinks by colonists who did not care very much about his opinions, had said almost nothing during the trial. He had sat in the Drakel section and watched and listened. On the last day, before the delegation's ships left orbit, he went to find Rael in the workshop. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Rael looked up from the workbench. You were not what I expected, Kale said. What did you expect? Rael said. Kale thought about it, something easier to dismiss. Rael nodded slowly, sorry to disappoint. You didn't, Kale said, and left before it could become a longer conversation. A year after the vote, Soru came back to Vorath. He flew in, that was new. He came down out of a grey sky on his own wings and landed in the flat field outside the east gate with a precision that was not quite perfect yet. He skidded slightly on the ice and had to correct with a tail sweep, but was genuinely impressive for his age. He folded his wings and walked to the gate. Rael was not there to meet him. No one had told Rael he was coming. Soru had wanted it that way. He found Rael in the east corridor, on his back underneath a heating unit, doing something to a condenser coil that was giving him trouble again. Soru sat beside the unit and waited. After a few minutes, Rael slid out, saw Soru, and sat up. He looked at him for a moment, at the size of him, at the dark blue of the scales, at the wings folded neat and whole against his back. You flew here, Rael said. Yes, Soru said. It took 4 days. I am getting better at distance. Good, Rael said. They sat for a moment in the corridor, the heating unit ticking between them. Then Soru said, You never asked what I was worth. Rael thought about the scanner reading in the blizzard, the small still shape in the snow, the decision that had not felt like a decision at all, just a direction. Didn't need to, he said. Soru was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, and something in him settled the way a long-held breath finally releases. Rael handed him a wrench. Hold that. Soru took it very carefully in his claws, enormous around the small metal tool. He held it with an earnestness that was almost funny and entirely genuine. Rael went back under the heating units. Somewhere in the compact's archives. In a file appended to a footnote of the formal inquiry record, a single human medic's incident log sat quietly. 6 days of careful notes. Not policy, not strategy, not diplomacy, just the record of someone who found a child in the cold and did not calculate whether it was worth the effort. It had been worth the effort. Outside, the snow came down over Vorath, the same as it always did, hard and sideways, and without mercy. Inside, the station was warm.